Ada for not helping my ex parent our son. So I, 38 years old, have a 16-year-old kid named Drew with my ex-wife Jessie. We parted up when Drew was 9 years old. We have a legal custody arrangement and divide parenting time 50/50. So Jessie marries a man called Mark, who is a policeman with 2 children from a prior marriage. I remarried my present wife Erin, and we had no children. So there's a lot of bad blood between Erin and Jessie, and I believe that's at the base of a lot of this. Erin was one of Jessie's bridesmaids during our wedding. There was no adultery on my side, we divorced, and a year later Erin and I met at a mutual friend's party. To set a positive example for our kid, we welcomed Mark/Jessie to our wedding. Drew was looking forward to it, but it fell on my ex's weekend, and she didn't accept the invitation or allow Drew to come, which is something Drew still blames his mother for. As a result, our whole parenting approach is distinct. I'm not a stickler for rules. I like having fun, being supportive, and being a nice ear for Drew. My wife and I don't have a lot of restrictions in our home. My ex-home wife's is much more organized. Chores, curfews, no cell phones at supper, a family meal every night, and so on. My ex-regulations wives are not enforced in our home. I'm still a parent to Drew, making sure he's doing the proper things, but I like to be laid back. My ex and I are frequently at odds over this. So Erin and I purchased our kid a vehicle, which irritated my ex since her intention had been for our son to work for his first automobile. His parents are unable to provide him with an allowance, so I do. He doesn't want much money and gets good marks. Therefore, I don't want him working and neglecting his academics. They attempted to punish him by taking away his automobile, and my son phoned me. I phoned his mother and inquired as to what was going on. Drew, she said, was disrespectful to her husband, so they stole the vehicle. I informed her that if she didn't return the vehicle to our son, I would contact the authorities and declare it stolen. The vehicle was returned. They attempted to take away his AirPods, computer, and Xbox since they were creating difficulties with his step-siblings. Basically, Drew's step-siblings didn't have any of them and were yelling at their parents about it. So I phoned him again to get his belongings back. Finally, Drew enjoys eating out a lot. Due to the no phone at family dinner guidelines, he spends a lot of time with us during meals. He also doesn't like his stepfather and adores Erin, so we don't force him to see his mother. Recently, he has asked us to deliver dinner to Jessie's. Drew is sent to his room if he refuses to dine with them or eat what they are eating. I generally simply email it to him, which I'm sure his step-siblings are unhappy about. Jessie contacted me last week to complain that Drew is spending all of his time at my house now, and that it's because I'm not parenting him properly and turning him against her. I said that I'm a parent, just not following all of her ridiculous rules. Erin believes we are doing the right thing by allowing Drew to have fun and be himself, and not to treat him as if he were a prisoner. Ada, Story 2. Ada for telling my daughter that if she won't stand up for herself, I don't want to hear about it. I divorced my wife about 2 decades ago because her job life had become so destructive to my mental health that I was having major anger control difficulties. To cut a long story short, she would never stand up for herself at work, no matter who it was. So she'd tell me these job tales about how frustrated she was, and I'd offer her recommendations, but nothing changed. Things worsened, and slowly but steadily, I was growing a bitterness I wasn't aware of, and I found myself becoming enraged whenever she mentioned work. She refused to go to counseling or do anything to help her position, and as a result, our marriage steadily crumbled. It wasn't until I chose to go to counseling, because I couldn't control my rage, that I understood the relationship had been poisonous for me. It took a lot longer after that, but we eventually divorced. Fast forward to now, and my adult daughter is now working for the federal government, where she is allowing the same thing that happened to her. We chat on the phone every other day. We live in separate places, and she's complained about the same scenario the last 3 times we've spoken. I made ideas to her, but nothing changed. I could feel my rage rising, so I simply stopped her last night and told her that if she won't stand up for herself, I don't want to hear about it. She called me an AH and then hung up. My son phoned this morning to ask why my sister is telling everyone I'm an AH and to hear my side, so I gave him the condensed story, and he confirmed I'm an AH as well. I realize I was a touch hasty in how I ended the talk, but I simply can't let that anger back into my life. Maybe that makes me weak, but I simply can't deal with it. Edit, examples of me standing up with my wife. She'd be part of a team of 5, but since she was so efficient, Her team leader, super, or manager would keep giving her additional work. She would never say no, even if she had more work than she could handle. She was working on 7 projects at once, while everyone else in her team was only working on 1. She simply wouldn't say anything. "I'm afraid not. I'm overburdened." I would actually advise her to say something like, "I'm already working on 7 projects, therefore I won't be able to take on another. Have you questioned X whether he is just working on 1 project right now?" She'd grumble, stress excessively, and have breakdowns before the week began due to job worries, but she still wouldn't say no. After years of witnessing this happen to my wife and her without doing anything to correct it or better herself so she might have confidence, the rage I had at her employer was transferring to her. I couldn't stand hearing about her job without feeling enraged, but I kept it bottled up until I couldn't. Now that my daughter is allowing the same thing to happen to her, just hearing about it puts me back in that place, and the fury I used to feel is resurfacing with my daughter. Update. Before I get to the update, I wanted to clarify a few things out. Before my anger problems surfaced, my wife and I had been married for 7 years, and I had been her emotional support for much longer. She introduced me to solutions/support, and we established our own set of ground rules. I merely listened on our regular walks. If she mentioned work at home, that meant we could talk about it. I did tell her she needed assistance, but it was towards the end of our relationship. She declined couples and individual counseling, insisting that it was my obligation to be there for her. I'd asked her previously whether she'd explored counseling or any other ways to help control her anxiety, but she refused to discuss it. I confessed that I was manipulating her, but my goal was to open her mind to the possibility that she can seek treatment if she wants it. Her own worry was the reason she never did. I had no choice but to leave the marriage. My daughter is approaching the age of 30. She isn't a kid, and I'm pleased to announce that we get along well. Her frequent phone calls should enough as evidence. For those who are wondering why my wrath is so difficult to control, I used to never get furious. I grew up believing that if something occurs, it happens. You have no influence over it, therefore don't worry about it. Because of this, I didn't have much experience with rage. When I first felt it, I simply bottled it all up. I was mistakenly under the impression that I was in command. The update. I was on a Zoom call with my kids. First, I apologized to my kid. I never told either of them why their mother and I split, so I described why our relationship ended while keeping their mother's participation to a minimum. I admitted to having mental health issues with rage. I made it quite obvious that it was not her fault. I discovered that their mother gave them a similar story, but she took the initiative. So they now have a complete picture. The discussion went nicely. I did my best to address their inquiries. I told my daughter that she could always talk to me and vent to me. She asked if she could let me know ahead of time if she wanted to rant about work, and it was humiliating, but I asked if she could. We decided that she'll text me "poor work day," and I'll call her if I'm able. My son didn't say much, but he did inform his sister that she could contact him to vent as well. Overall, things are going well. I did, however, make an appointment with my therapist. I've only been seeing her once a month up to this point, but this episode warranted a phone call. In addition, my daughter has opted to visit a therapist for her anxiousness, but she refuses to leave the federal government. She claims that the job stability outweighs the danger in light of the uncertain future of the economy. I'm quite proud of her. There isn't much more to say. Thank you everybody for your generosity and time. For everyone who has a grudge against me, I hope you are able to find your own tranquility. Cheers.